The silver spoon slipped from Elias's hand as he whispered, "I'm waiting for my mom." The words were so small they should have vanished beneath the clink of crystal and the low, polished laughter filling Roman Vale's dining hall. Instead, they cut through the room with the strange force only truth carries. Beneath the chandelier's gold light, the little boy sat alone at the far corner of a banquet table built for adults, his tiny dress shirt slightly wrinkled, his shoes not quite touching the floor. A red velvet bow hung crooked at his throat. Someone had dressed him for Christmas. No one had made space for him inside it. 12 holiday guests turned to look, some with curiosity, some with irritation, as if a child's voice had interrupted a financial deal. The estate staff kept moving with lowered eyes, silver trays balanced in careful hands, trained to disappear even while standing in plain view. Naomi Carter was one of them, moving along the wall with a coffee service, black uniform crisp, shoulders straight, face calm in the disciplined way of people who had learned to survive humiliation by refusing to perform pain. But she heard him. Every part of her heard him. Her steps broke for half a second, just enough to rattle porcelain against porcelain. She did not turn immediately. If she did, the guests would notice. If they noticed, they would ask questions. And questions were dangerous in a house where power sat at the head of the table and kindness had never been listed among the courses. Elias looked down at the spoon, now spinning near his plate. His lower lip trembled, but he tried to sit still, as if stillness might earn permission to stay. "I said I'm waiting for my mom," he repeated, louder this time. The room thinned into silence. One woman in emerald satin gave a short laugh into her wineglass. A man beside her leaned back and said, "Whose kid is this? One of the staff bring him in for the show." Naomi set the coffee pot down before her hand could betray her. Across the length of the table, Roman Vale lifted his eyes. He had spent the evening wearing the same expression he wore in negotiations, funerals, and threats, cold enough to stop questions before they formed. At 42, he carried power the way some men carried scars, quietly, permanently, with no need to display it twice. The guests measured every word around him. The staff measured every breath. Yet now his attention moved past imported crystal, carved roast, and expensive smiles, and settled on a 3-year-old boy who should not have been there alone. Naomi finally turned. The distance between mother and son could not have been more than 20 feet. It felt like a punishment built out of marble. She saw immediately what had happened. One of the guests must have thought the child wandering near the service corridor was amusing and placed him at the table as a joke, like a living centerpiece no one had ordered. Elias had been taught to wait where adults told him to wait. So he had obeyed. He had obeyed into public shame. "Elias," Naomi said, barely above a breath. His face lit for one desperate second. "Mommy." That one word exposed everything. Heads turned not toward the child now, but toward the maid in black. The woman in emerald satin smiled with the lazy cruelty of someone who expected no consequences. "You brought your son to work on Christmas?" Another guest added, "Roman, your house is getting sentimental." Naomi stepped away from the wall. That was the choice that changed the room. Not a rescue. Not yet. A claim. She crossed the polished floor with all eyes on her, each step risking more than embarrassment. In houses like this, staff were not supposed to have personal lives, much less children who could suddenly appear and remind the rich that service came from human hands. Crystal light trembled across the long dining room table, catching on silver forks, wine glasses, and the stunned faces of 12 holiday guests who had expected entertainment, not truth. Christmas music still drifted in from the next room, soft and cheerful, almost cruel against the tension now tightening every breath in the mansion. Elias Carter stood near the doorway in a little wool coat, one mitten hanging from a string, looking too small for the polished grandeur around him. Naomi Carter moved toward him with her spine straight and her hands steady. But the cost of that walk showed in her eyes. This was no longer about embarrassment. It was about exposure, and in houses built on obedience, exposure could take away a person's livelihood in a single minute. "Elias." The child turned at the sound of Naomi Carter's voice, and relief lit his face so purely that even a few guests looked away. He reached for Naomi Carter at once, small arms lifted, trusting that the world could still be repaired if his mother touched him. Naomi Carter knelt despite the stares, despite the whisper already moving down the table like smoke. Her apron brushed the gleaming floor. One gloved hand cupped his cheek, the other pulled him into her chest, and for one brief second the room saw what it had refused to imagine, that the woman clearing their plates had a child who waited for her, missed her, loved her. A man near the center of the table let out a dry laugh. You brought a toddler into Roman Vale's Christmas dinner? Another woman swirled her drink and smiled without warmth. Or did security fail to notice? The insult changed shape. A moment earlier, they had mocked Naomi Carter's station. Now they were weighing her fitness, her judgment, her right to remain inside this house at all. The danger had climbed from humiliation to livelihood. 7 estate staff remained frozen along the walls, eyes lowered, knowing exactly what this could mean. For members of the security team stood at their posts, silent, waiting for Roman Vale's signal and nothing else. Naomi Carter rose with Elias Carter in her arms. Her pulse beat hard enough to shake the child against her shoulder, but her voice came out low and clear. I did not bring him here for attention. He was told to wait in the service corridor until my shift ended. Her gaze cut, for the first time, not to the guests but to the staff entrance beyond them. He came looking for me because he thought I had forgotten him. That landed harder than any plea. If this moment already unsettles you, stay with it, because the silence that followed would force every person in that room to reveal exactly what kind of soul they carried. Roman Vale had not moved. At the head of the table, he sat in that terrible stillness powerful men wear when anger has not yet chosen a target. The candlelight carved hard lines into his face, turning him almost to stone. But his eyes had shifted, not toward the guests, toward the child's mitten string, the cheap coat, the reddened ears from winter cold, toward details no one else thought worthy of notice. Who let him stand outside the main hall alone? Roman Vale asked. No one answered. The question was not loud. That made it worse. One member of the security team stepped forward half an inch, then stopped. A guest opened his mouth to joke again, perhaps to smooth over the tension, perhaps because cruelty had become reflex. Roman Vale looked at him once. Don't. The word dropped like a blade. Naomi Carter felt the room tilt. This was not rescue. Not yet. But it was a line being drawn, and every person present knew who had drawn it. Elias Carter, sensing the danger without understanding it, buried his face in Naomi Carter's neck. Tiny fingers clutched the fabric of her uniform as if it were the only safe thing in a world of marble, crystal, and strangers. Roman Vale rose. Chair legs scraped the floor. Several guests straightened instinctively. Steel cut through the candlelight as chair legs dragged across polished marble, and the soft clink of crystal died in 12 startled hands. No one spoke when Roman Vale stood. The estate staff froze where they were. The security team, for men placed like shadows along the walls, straightened without moving a step. Naomi Carter held Elias Carter closer, her pulse visible at the base of her throat, while the child pressed his cheek against her shoulder and refused to look at the room. Roman did not raise his voice. That made the silence worse. Finish your dinner, he said. The order was for everyone, but his eyes never left Naomi Carter. A few nervous laughs tried to survive and failed. Forks lifted again. Conversations returned in broken pieces, low and careful now, as though the mansion itself had grown ears. Then Roman turned and crossed the room with the calm precision of a man who had ended arguments with less effort than it took to lift a glass. He stopped beside Naomi Carter, glanced once at Elias Carter, and spoke without softness. The child is tired. Naomi Carter dipped her head. Yes. Take him upstairs. Feed him first. Just a sentence. Just permission. But in that house, permission from Roman Vale was a borderline, and everyone knew it. Thank you, she said. He froze for half a beat at the sound of it, as if gratitude from her felt heavier than fear from anyone else. Then he stepped aside. Naomi Carter moved quickly, carrying Elias Carter out of the dining room, past the towering tree wrapped in gold ribbon and white lights, past the fireplace where expensive stockings hung for display more than love. She could feel Roman's gaze follow her all the way to the door. The room breathed again only after she was gone. Later, the mansion shifted into its midnight rhythm. Guests drifted toward brandy and whispered damage control. The estate staff cleared plates with lowered eyes. Snow pressed against the tall windows and silver sheets, and the house, for all its warmth, felt built from stone judgment. In the service kitchen, under the buzzing yellow light, Naomi Carter cut Elias Carter's food into tiny pieces with tired hands. The little table near the pantry was too small, the chair mismatched, the scene hidden from every polished room upstairs. Elias Carter rubbed his eyes and leaned on the table, still wearing the red sweater she had washed by hand the night before. "Mom's coming for Christmas," he murmured, the words slow with sleep. "She always comes when the bells ring." The knife stopped in Naomi Carter's hand. From the dark hallway beyond the kitchen door, Roman heard every word. He had come alone this time, without guards, following not out of command but out of something more dangerous. Curiosity had sharpened into focus. Focus was becoming need. He stood where the light from the kitchen reached only his shoes and watched Naomi Carter close her eyes for one painful second before she answered. "Eat first, baby." Did she get lost? Naomi Carter swallowed. Maybe delayed. Roman's jaw tightened. Not because of the lie, because of the date. A memory, buried under 20 years of blood, money, and control, shifted inside him. Christmas Eve. A church bell. A woman waiting under frozen streetlights with a child's knitted ornament in her coat pocket. He had locked that night away so completely that even his anger had stopped touching it. But now the words from a 3-year-old pulled at the seal. He stepped into the doorway. Naomi Carter turned so fast the chair legs scraped the tile. Fear crossed her face first, then calculation. She moved between Roman and Elias Carter without thinking, one hand going to the child's shoulder. That was what Roman noticed most. Not obedience. Protection. Who was he waiting for? Roman asked. Naomi Carter's voice stayed level by force. Children say things when they're tired. Elias Carter looked up, studying Roman with the open seriousness only very young children possess. In the harsh kitchen light, details landed all at once. The kitchen light showed what the Christmas dining room had hidden. Elias Carter's coat was too thin for December, one sleeve mended by hand with dark thread that did not match the fabric. His sneakers had been cleaned carefully, but the rubber at the toes had begun to separate. Naomi Carter saw Roman Vale noticing all of it, and something old and guarded moved behind her eyes at once. "It's late," she said, steady but tight. "He should be asleep." That should have ended it. In Roman's house, most people treated his questions like orders and his silence like a storm warning. But Naomi Carter did not bend in the usual way. She did something far more dangerous. She withdrew. With one small shift of her body, she closed Elias Carter off from him, not rudely, not dramatically, just completely. The room felt that choice even before anyone spoke again. Roman Vale had spent years reading fear in other people. He knew the difference between guilt, greed, and panic. What stood in Naomi Carter now was not guilt. It was calculation under pressure, the kind built by someone who had learned that powerful men rarely asked questions for kind reasons. "Bring him upstairs," Roman Vale said. Her chin lifted a fraction. "I can manage." 3 quiet words. A refusal wrapped in courtesy. The estate staff, still moving in the edges of the kitchen, worked more carefully after that, making less noise than 7 adults should have been able to make in a room full of plates, steam, and silver. Even the security team beyond the service hall seemed to sense that some line had been reached. The house was warm, scented with cinnamon, roast meat, and pine from the towering tree in the main hall. Yet around Naomi Carter, the air had turned into winter. Roman Vale did not press again in front of the child. That was the first choice. It cost him authority, or seemed to. Men in his world never stepped back unless they planned to strike harder later. But he only nodded once and moved aside. Naomi Carter took Elias Carter, gathered his little backpack from beneath the prep table, and left the kitchen without looking back. From the corridor, the sound of distant laughter drifted in from the holiday guests, all 12 of them still drinking under crystal light and pretending wealth made them decent. Roman Vale stayed where he was for a long moment, staring at the spot where the child had stood. Then he looked at the backpack hook near the rear stairs. It was empty, a detail small enough for anyone else to miss. But a man who survived by tracking exits noticed when a person had already planned one. Upstairs, inside the narrow maid's room beneath the east eaves, Naomi Carter locked the door and finally let her hands shake. Elias Carter had fallen half asleep against her shoulder, warm and heavy with trust. She laid him on the bed, knelt beside a worn duffel bag in the closet, and added what she had already hidden there over the past week: 2 folded changes of clothes, a child's dinosaur sweater, a pharmacy bottle with only a few doses left, cash tucked into a sock, and a bus schedule creased from being checked too many times. After Christmas breakfast, before daylight fully opened, she meant to leave the estate and disappear before Roman Vale could decide what kind of interest he had taken in her son. Leave. The words sounded like prayer and surrender at once. Downstairs, Roman Vale did not return to his guests immediately. Instead, he crossed the service wing alone and stopped outside the small records office where employee files were kept under lock. The steel key turned with a dry click. Inside, under dim yellow light, rows of neat folders lined the cabinet with the impersonality of a courthouse. He found Naomi Carter's file too quickly. Application. Emergency contact left blank. Previous address crossed out. Employment gaps explained in thin, careful language that explained nothing. No spouse listed. No father listed for Elias Carter. The missing name sat on the page like a wound that had never closed. Under the jaundiced bulb of the records office, the file in Roman Vale's hand seemed lighter than paper and heavier than stone. Naomi Carter's employment form offered almost nothing, yet what it withheld pressed harder than what it revealed. No emergency contact, no listed spouse, no father named for Elias Carter. Outside, faint Christmas music drifted down the hallway from the main house, warm and artificial, while inside the air smelled of dust, toner, and old secrets. A smaller envelope slipped from the back of the folder when he turned it over. It hit the metal desk with a dry tap. Roman stared at it for a beat, then opened it with the edge of his thumb. Inside was a photocopy of a hospital discharge summary, likely included because Naomi had requested a flexible schedule when Elias Carter was born. Most of it had been blacked out for privacy before it ever reached the estate. But one line remained visible near the bottom because the copier had cut the page crooked, next of kin at admission, handwritten in hurried ink. Lena Vale. The room went silent. That name had not been spoken aloud in his house in 11 years. Not by the estate staff. Not by the holiday guests. Not even by Roman himself, unless memory cornered him in the dark. Lena Vale had been his younger sister, the one person in his life untouched by the blood and bargaining that followed his name. She had vanished from him before Christmas more than a decade earlier, leaving behind a storm of betrayal, a closed casket without answers, and a guilt so deep it had hardened into instinct. He looked again, colder now, more precise. The handwriting was old. The date on the form placed it 3 years earlier, the week Elias Carter was born. Naomi Carter had been admitted under a previous address that matched the neighborhood where Lena Vale had once volunteered at a women's shelter before her death. Roman's pulse slowed in the dangerous way it always did when emotion gave way to calculation. Not grief. Pattern. He laid the photocopy beside Naomi Carter's application and saw another detail that should have meant nothing. The signature on her hiring paperwork curved the same way Lena Vale's had on old family documents, especially the long slash beneath the last letter. It was not proof. It was not even reason. But it was enough to split open every earlier moment of the night. Naomi Carter's guarded eyes. Elias Carter's face lifted toward the Christmas lights. The child's soft voice saying he was waiting for his mom, as if waiting were the central fact of his life. Roman had heard loneliness in it then. Now he heard an echo. From the corridor came the muffled sound of laughter from the 12 holiday guests, brittle and overfed. Somewhere farther off, silverware chimed against china. The mansion glowed with gold light and evergreen perfume, but in that office Christmas no longer felt gentle. It felt like camouflage. He took out his phone and called for one of the 4 men on the security team. Come alone. 3 minutes later, one guard entered and shut the door behind him. Roman spread the documents across the desk without offering explanation. His voice stayed low enough to keep the walls from learning too much. I want everything on Naomi Carter's previous address, hospital intake, and any connection to Lena Vale. Quietly. No police. No digital trail that leads back here. If anyone in this house asks, you were checking vendor invoices. The guard glanced at the name on the photocopy, then back at Roman's face, and understood enough not to ask questions. In Roman's world, silence was not politeness. It was survival. And the child? The guard asked carefully. Roman's jaw tightened. Through the office window, he could see the snowy edge of the rear garden silver under floodlights, untouched and deceptively clean. The answer came a second later, small and devastating. He stays with me. Snowlight pressed against the office window in a pale sheet, turning the glass into a mirror that reflected Roman Vale's face back at him. Hard, controlled, and suddenly older than 42. The guard at the door gave one short nod and left without another word. Outside, the mansion still carried the polished illusion of Christmas. Garland wound around black iron railings. Warm gold lights spilling across marble. The faint clink of glasses from the West Salon, where the 12 holiday guests still pretended this was a civilized gathering. But under that velvet surface, the house had shifted. Naomi Carter had a forged absence to protect her job for one more hour. Elias Carter had become a problem with a heartbeat. And somewhere beyond the gates, someone else already knew enough to turn that child into leverage. In the service corridor below, one of the 7 estate staff hurried past with a tray and then stopped dead at the sight of Roman striding down the stairs himself. He never entered that part of the house during parties unless something had gone wrong. Tonight, everything had. At the end of the hall, Naomi stood outside the laundry room with Elias bundled against her shoulder, his little hand knotted in the collar of her plain black uniform. Her face changed when she saw Roman. Not relief, not trust, but the rigid stillness of someone bracing for a verdict. She had spent the last hour hiding a child inside a mansion where children were not supposed to exist, and secrets in Roman's world were punished before they were explained. "Give him to me," Roman said. The words hit like a threat. Naomi took one step back. No, that single syllable would have gotten stronger people thrown out of his house. Yet it landed differently now. Roman saw what stood inside it. Not defiance for pride's sake, but the raw animal refusal of a mother who had already lost too much control. Before he could answer, the silence shattered. A crash echoed from the rear vestibule. Then another. Fast footsteps. A sharp voice from the security radio clipped through the corridor air. South entrance breach. 2 men down by the loading drive. Naomi's grip tightened around Elias so hard the child whimpered. Roman turned at once. This was no longer the quiet danger of documents, whispers, and hidden truths. Someone had tested the weak edge of his property and chosen the service side, the one place guests ignored and guards relaxed around holiday routine. Not a coincidence. Not tonight. One of the 4 security guards appeared at the corridor corner, breath visible in the cold draft sweeping in from the back hall. "They're not inside yet," he said, but they came straight through the outer service gate, asking for the maid. The room went still. Naomi's face drained of color. She did not ask how. She already knew what Roman now understood with lethal clarity. The photocopy, the old name on it, the trail she had tried to outrun before coming here. Someone had followed it. Someone had connected her to this house. And because Roman had hidden her instead of moving her, the danger had reached the child first. Elias began to cry. Roman stepped forward, took off his suit coat, and wrapped it around the boy before Naomi could protest. Then he looked at the guard, and the softness vanished from his expression like a light being switched off. "Lock the West Salon," he said. "No guest leaves, no guest wanders. Put 2 men on the rear corridor. One on the kitchen turn. One with me." The guard ran. Naomi stared at Roman as if she no longer recognized the boundary between employer and protector. "Why would they ask for me?" Roman met her eyes. "Because they think you're alone." For a fraction of a second, fear gave way to anger. "And am I?" It was the question he had earned. Outside the West Salon, Christmas music still drifted thinly through the mansion, warped by distance and fear, while the storm pressed hard against the tall windows like a living thing trying to get in. The fire in the marble hearth threw restless light across overturned glasses, silk dresses, polished shoes, and faces that no longer looked festive. The 12 holiday guests had gone quiet in the adjoining room under the watch of the estate staff and Roman Vale's security team, and that silence made every small sound sharper. The crack of ice against glass, the hiss of radiator heat, the tiny tremor in a child's breath. Near the velvet sofa, Elias Carter clung to Naomi Carter's coat with both hands, his cheeks wet, his eyes heavy with confusion more than tears. The whole mansion felt as if it were holding its breath for an answer that had been buried too long. Naomi did not look away this time. Fear was still in her, but anger had climbed over it, steadier now, warmer, almost bright. "You asked if they think I'm alone," she said, keeping one hand on Elias Carter's back. "Men like them always think that. Men with money. Men with guards. Men who enter a room and expect everyone else to shrink. Roman Vale stood a few feet from her, coat open, gun low at his side, the hard lines of his face lit by fire and winter lightning. He could command rooms, markets, lives. But her voice stopped him more completely than any weapon had. "Say it," he said. A gust of wind rattled the window panes. Somewhere deeper in the house, a door shut hard. Naomi swallowed once. 3 years ago, I cleaned rooms at another estate outside the city. Private parties. Rich men. Drunk wives. Security that looked away when ordered. Her mouth tightened. One night a deal went bad. Not in the room I was cleaning. In the room next door. I heard shouting, then a gunshot, then another. I hid under a service table because I knew the kind of men involved didn't leave witnesses they considered disposable. Roman's jaw shifted, but he did not interrupt. When the house emptied, one of the men came through the corridor with blood on his cuff. He saw me. He knew I had hurt enough to matter. Her fingers curled into the fabric at Elias Carter's shoulder. I ran. He caught me outside by the loading gate. If one older cook hadn't opened the pantry exit at the right second, I would have disappeared that night. The room went still. Naomi's voice lowered. Weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. I never told anyone whose child Elias Carter was suspected to be connected to, because suspicion alone can get a woman buried. And I never trusted powerful men again, because every powerful man in that world protects himself first. Roman's eyes narrowed, not in anger at her, but at memory. He knew the estate. He knew the deal. He knew the men who had handled that corridor. One of them had once worked under his protection before branching off into independent business Roman had allowed to continue because it was useful, profitable, distant enough not to stain his floors, distant enough to ignore. He froze mid-breath. "You knew them," Naomi said, reading the truth before he spoke it. "Not knew exactly. Worse, your world made them possible." The words landed harder than accusation. They were simple, and therefore impossible to dodge. Roman stared into the fire for one beat too long. In that flicker, he saw every compromise renamed strategy, every cruelty filed under necessity, every monster tolerated because it served the machine. "I didn't order what happened to you," he said at last. "No," Naomi answered. "You just built a world where men like that believed they were safe." Elias Carter lifted his face thin, small and flushed, unaware of the architecture of sin standing over him. "I'm waiting for my mom," he whispered, as if reminding the room of the only truth that mattered to him. "I want my mom." The child's voice did what accusation had failed to do. It cut through velvet manners, holiday crystal, and the polished lies of a house built to make cruelty look respectable. In that private sitting room off the main hall, the Christmas tree lights trembled against dark wood paneling, and for one suspended second, even the fireplace seemed to lower its crackling breath. Roman Vale looked at Elias Carter, then at Naomi Carter, and something old and armored inside him gave way under the weight of one unbearable truth. The boy was not calling for comfort. He was calling for the only person who had ever made him feel safe, while standing in a mansion that had nearly taken her from him. Naomi did not move closer to Roman. That, more than tears would have, told him how complete the damage was. Her cheeks still carried the faint redness of what had been done earlier that night. Her uniform sleeve was torn at the cuff. She stood upright anyway, one hand resting on Elias Carter's shoulder, as if dignity were the last piece of clothing no one had managed to rip away. Roman had spent years believing control meant distance, that order could be purchased through fear and maintained through silence. But silence was exactly what had protected the men who hurt her. Silence had dressed itself as efficiency, loyalty, tradition. And on Christmas night, with a 3-year-old asking for his mother in a whisper that sounded like prayer, Roman finally believed what he had refused to face. Naomi had not been harmed by a crack in his empire. She had been harmed by its design. "Bring everyone into the ballroom," he said. The words landed cold and final. One of the 4 members of the security team hesitated only long enough to understand the danger of the order. The 12 holiday guests were still drinking beneath chandeliers and gold garlands, still speaking in low, pleased voices about markets and shipments and family legacies. The 7 estate staff had been pushed to the edges all night, clearing plates, carrying coats, erasing the evidence of wealth's appetite. Roman was now calling every witness into the same room, not to protect appearances, to destroy them. Within minutes, the ballroom filled with a tension thicker than music. A violin recording still floated softly from hidden speakers, absurd in its elegance. Crystal glasses reflected amber light. Faces turned. The 12 holiday guests expected a toast. The 7 estate staff stood near the walls, uncertain and pale. The 4 members of the security team positioned themselves at the doors, no longer decorative, no longer invisible. Naomi entered holding Elias Carter in her arms. Roman followed half a step behind her, and that alone sent confusion through the room like a crack through ice. Then he did the one thing no one in that house had ever seen him do. He stood beside the maid. A murmur moved through the guests. One woman set down her glass too fast and chipped the rim. One man tried to laugh, then stopped when Roman's eyes found him. Those eyes had settled disputes, ended careers, and buried betrayals. Tonight they were different. Not softer. Worse. Clear. "This woman was harmed under my roof," Roman said, his voice carrying without effort to every corner of the room. "A child was left to wait for his mother, while cowards trusted my name would protect them." The room went still. No one asked what he meant. Too many already knew. Roman lifted one hand, and one of the security team stepped forward holding a tablet. Recorded hallway footage glowed against the Christmas lights. No speech was needed. The evidence was ugly in its simplicity. Blocked exits, forced handling, staff looking away, privilege moving like it believed itself untouchable. Naomi closed her eyes once, only once. Elias Carter buried his face against her shoulder. Across the room, color drained from more than one face among the 12 holiday guests. Roman did not look away from any of them. "You believed service meant silence," he said. Roman Vale's voice did not rise. It did not need to. In the great room, beneath the gold glow of Christmas chandeliers and the cold glitter of ornaments, quiet became heavier than shouting ever could. The 12 holiday guests stood exposed by their own faces now. Some pale, some defensive, some staring at the floor as if polished stone might swallow them whole. The 7 estate staff remained near the edges of the room, still and shaken, no longer invisible. The 4 members of the security team held their positions at the doors, not as decoration now, but as a line that could not be crossed. Naomi Carter adjusted Elias Carter higher on her shoulder. Her fingers trembled from exhaustion, but not from fear anymore. Fear had burned through her hours ago and left something stronger behind. The little boy clung to her, one small hand fisted in the fabric near her collarbone, his cheek warm against her neck. Roman took one step forward. "You believed service meant silence," he said. Then he turned, not to the guests first, but to Naomi. That was the true shift. All evening, power had moved around her like weather. Now it stopped and faced her directly. Roman crossed the marble floor until only a few feet separated them. His expression was still severe, still cut from the same hard lines that had ruled rooms and ruined men. But his eyes held something the mansion had almost forgotten he possessed. "Shame. I was told enough to suspect wrongdoing," he said, every word clean and public. "I was not told enough because I did not ask enough. That failure is mine." The room went silent in a new way. Not the silence of fear, the silence of a debt being named. Naomi looked at him without lowering her eyes. The bruised dark evening had taken too much from her for politeness to matter more than truth. "My son waited for me," she said softly. "That is what all of this comes down to. He waited, and people here decided that did not matter." Elias lifted his head then, sleepy and confused, his curls mussed, his voice small enough to break a stronger person than Roman Vale. "I waited for my mom." No one moved. The Christmas tree lights reflected in Roman's eyes as if the room itself had paused to hear judgment. For a man who had survived blood, betrayal, and the kind of violence that taught others not to look him in the face, that child's simple sentence landed harder than any threat. Not because it accused him of cruelty he intended, but because it named the human cost of cruelty he allowed near him. Roman lowered himself to one knee. It was not theatrical. It was not soft. It was simply necessary. He looked at Elias, then at Naomi. "You should never have had to prove your worth to be treated like a mother," he said. "And he should never have had to wonder if you were coming back." One of the holiday guests tried to speak, some brittle excuse about misunderstanding, about drinks, about a festive mood gone too far. Roman raised one hand. The excuse died unborn. "To the 12 guests who mistook wealth for character," he said, rising again. You are leaving tonight under escort. Every business arrangement connected to this house is over. You will receive copies of the footage and the notice from my attorneys by morning. A sharp intake of breath cut through the room. Consequences had finally found a language these people understood. Then Roman faced the Seven Estate staff. Anyone who stayed silent out of fear will keep their position while this house is corrected. Anyone who participated is done here. His gaze moved to the security team. The four of you will see every instruction carried out exactly. For nods. Immediate. Final. But justice, Roman understood now, was not complete when the guilty were removed. It was complete when the wounded no longer had to live under the shadow of what had been done to them. He turned back to Naomi.